Detective Recap here. Today, I'm going to explain a crime drama film called Miss Point 45, which shows how the horrors of an uncaring and exploitative world can make a good woman turn bad. Also known as Angel of Vengeance, this aptly titled movie follows the story of a silent vigilante blurring the violent lines between revenge and retribution. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. Are you the prey or are you the hunter? The answer to this question shapes the way a person's life unfolds. But when the hunter becomes the hunted and the prey becomes the predator, it becomes the world's problem, too. In a garment factory in Manhattan, a mute, young seamstress named Tana heads home after a day of work. While walking, Tana and her friends are pestered by some vulgar men, but they ignore them as they head to a bar. Though her friends try inviting her for some drinks, Tana politely refuses and goes to a supermarket instead. After shopping for meat in a grocery store, Tana is walking home when suddenly, a heinous man viciously grabs her. He pulls her to a back alley, and there, he forces himself onto her. Once the disgusting man was done, Tana lies by the trash bin, traumatized. Mustering her remaining strength, a drained Tana returns home and sits down by her couch to recuperate from her crushing incident. Already, it's clear that Tana and her friends are navigating an environment that treats them as little more than meat to be consumed. From the way they've been ogled at and catcalled with every step of the way, many of the men around them just make the streets uncomfortable for them to travel. To Tana's friends, they were little more than a nuisance, but to Tana, these men became a real and tangible danger. The unnerving thing is, it didn't have to be just Tana. Any lone woman could have taken her place and suffered the same tragedy as her. But just when it feels like Tana's day couldn't get worse, it did. Tana is suddenly confronted by a burglar, who threatens to kill her if she dares scream. Despite his demands for money, Tana is unable to speak, annoying the burglar. But he soon realizes that she's mute, and upon noticing her torn clothes, he decides to take advantage of her. The burglar lays Tana on the floor as he shamelessly forces himself on her, repeating the evils that Tana just experienced earlier. At first, Tana could only lie helplessly on the floor while the burglar continues, but in a bout of quick thinking, she grabs a glass ball near her. Hearing the burglar drop his gun, Tana immediately strikes him, making him fall to the floor. Tana quickly gets up and picks up an iron before smashing it against the burglar's head. Dazed, Tana pulls the burglar to her bathtub. As she struggles with it, she suddenly hears a dog barking outside. She quickly fixes her apartment, hides the bloody iron under the couch, then covers herself up. Finally, she cautiously checks outside to see if anyone's there. After finding no one outside, Tana falls to the ground in a mix of fear and relief. After being forced into one soul-crushing evil after another, it's almost a wonder how Tana can still pick herself up and fight against her second assailant. Unfortunately, that's the world Tana lives in, and she has no other choice but to fight and even kill to survive. Naturally, being the victim of a harrowing crime can change a person, but killing, even if in self-defense, can also have that effect. The next day in the garment factory, Tana's boss, Albert, scolds one of the workers there, scaring the other women inside. After looking at a trash bag, an idea strikes Tana, and she freezes in shock, alarming her coworkers. As they ask her how she's feeling, Tana tries nodding at them, but she soon zones out with memories from the previous night still haunting her. After work, Tana heads home again and immediately goes to the bathroom. She saws the burglar's body apart before stuffing the pieces inside trash bags, which she then hides in her fridge. Afterwards, Tana cleans up her bathroom, removing the evidence of her brutal attacker. Once she's finished, Tana stares at herself in the mirror, still clearly traumatized from everything that happened. Suddenly, she hears water coming from the drain, so she checks on it. There, she realizes that bits of the burglar's flesh are clogging up the drain, but Tana just heads to bed and rests for the night. The next morning, Tana leaves the apartment to throw the dismembered body into a trash bin along the streets. With that, she heads to work. There's some poetic justice to be had with the way the burglar's body has been chopped into pieces and disposed of as if it were meat. In the beginning, it was Tana and her friends who were being treated like meat on display. Now, the burglar is being treated with the same disregard and brutality. In the garment factory, Tana irons a dress before she zones out. Still remembering the horrors of the other night's ordeal, she accidentally burns the dress. Albert comes to check on her, but Tana dismisses his attempts to help. A few hours later, a heckler tries picking up some girls along the streets but is constantly ignored. Feeling hopeless, he desperately tries looking for more when he suddenly spots Tana getting off a taxi. Tana quickly walks, dropping a bag of the burglar's body on the streets, and the heckler notices this. He then follows her and tries to return the bag to her. Panicking, Tana runs away while the man chases her along the streets, but eventually, Tana reaches a dead end, leaving her fearful of getting violated again. As the heckler makes his way to her to return the bag, Tana quickly gets out the .45 pistol that she got from the burglar. She shoots the heckler with it, killing him instantly. Tana frantically returns home, vomiting as she thinks about how she committed her second murder. Suddenly, her neighbor, Ms. Nassany, quickly knocks at her door, asking if she's fine. Tana answers the door, so she can nod to let Mrs. Nassany know that she's okay. Unconvinced, Mrs. Nassany tries to get a doctor for Tana, but she refuses before escorting Mrs. Nassany out of her apartment. Later that night, Tana nervously shifts in her bed as she dreams of the traumatic things that happened to her. Now, the extent of Tana's trauma is unfolding. Not only is she ceaselessly haunted by the despicable ways in which she was violated, she is now unable to trust the men who approach her. Even though the heckler may not have been looking to force himself on her, she still can't afford to lower her guard because she must have felt that the world had already punished her for doing just that. At this point, Tana can only trust herself and her .45 pistol. The next day, a homeless man in the streets tries rummaging for food in a trash bin. While searching around the bin, he suddenly shrieks in horror as he finds one of the burglar's hands in a bag that Tana threw away. Meanwhile, in the office, Albert speaks with Tana. He expresses his concern over Tana's dwindling efforts with their clothing line. Calmly, Albert asks her to get back on track with her work, adding that she should be more like her coworkers. He then invites her over for a Halloween party to help her calm down. In response, Tana writes a note to Albert, telling him that she'll try before leaving his office. Afterwards, her friend, Carol, asks her why Albert called her to his office, but Tana replies through a note that she wants to be left alone. Understanding Tana, Carol looks at her reassuringly before they go out for lunch with some of her coworkers. In the restaurant, Tana and her friends are enjoying their meals when suddenly, a man named Rich Folk tries introducing himself to them. One of her coworkers, Lori, rudely sways Rich off before she and her friends head out, leaving Tana alone in the restaurant. These women really can't catch a break. Even when they're just minding their own business and eating together, they'd still come across people like Rich, who feel entitled to their time and attention. While approaching people isn't a crime, there's still something to be said about how the men in this story are barely giving the women any room to breathe without getting hounded. After fixing her things, Tana leaves as well, and she heads over to the pedestrian crossing. Rich follows her, and he apologizes for his earlier actions before introducing himself. Tana tries to walk away from him, but Rich continues to pester her, bragging about his job as a fashion photographer before inviting her over to his studio. Tana is reluctant to join him, but she eventually agrees to go. The two then go to Rich's condominium, where they take the elevator to the studio. Upon their arrival, Rich heads inside alone while Tana abruptly takes out her gun. She coldly shoots Rich, then leaves him all alone in the studio as she heads back home. Later that night, Tana puts heavy makeup on herself, contrasting how she usually looks before heading out again for the city. From there, Tana wreaks a bloodbath around town. She saves an escort from a violent pimp, kills a gang of thieves, and even shoots a wealthy sheik. It's a night of havoc in Manhattan, and Tana has taken her self-construed justice into her own hands as a vigilante. But above all, Tana has taken the role of an angel of vengeance, using the very weapon of her own assailant, that .45 pistol. In every step of the way, the men who hurt her are the ones compelling Tana and giving her the ability to kill. Her using that pistol can be the image of her reclaiming her power, or it's the image of her still shackled and trapped by her anguish. Either way, it's the gun that helps her perpetuate a cycle of worldly violence. The next morning, Tana coldly washes the blood away from her hands before hearing Mrs. Nassani's dog barking rapidly. Annoyed, Tana comes up with a solution for the dog's barking. She grinds some of the burglar's meat from the fridge before giving it to Mrs. Nassani as she listens to the news of last night's kill spree. A few hours later, Tana heads out, and she disposes of some of the burglar's body parts again on her way to the factory. In his office, Albert scolds Tana for not returning to work the previous day, which worried him and the rest of her coworkers. Tana sheepishly listens to Albert's tirades, and he's disappointed that she isn't even going to the Halloween party. But Tana cuts him off, writing a note saying that she wants to go. Amused, Albert invites Tana to the party as his partner, and Tana coldly accepts. Shortly after, Albert and Tana join the rest of their coworkers as they watch Lori hook up with a man. The group laughs at the sight, amused by Lori's intensity, while Albert and Tana share seductive looks. Later that night, Tana goes around the city again in search of her next victims. While waiting inside a phone booth, Tana spots a man making out with his girlfriend before he leaves for home. Tana follows the man to his apartment and prepares to shoot him. However, the man enters his home, leaving a disappointed Tana outside. The more Tana unravels, the more evident it is that she's no longer doing this for justice. Her crusade against the men of Manhattan has turned into a crusade of contempt and vengeance. Perhaps her resentment has grown so strong that she started believing that all men are deserving of death. Maybe she's trying to keep the high of finally being the predator in a society that keeps putting her on the lowest rung of the echelon. No matter what Tana's reasoning is, Tana's just out for blood now, and there's barely a justification for this. Still in search of a target, Tana moves to a bar and sits beside a man there. He blabbers on about his life with his wife and job while Tana fakes interest in the man's stories. Soon, they sit on a nearby bench outside the bar. With a lost look in his eyes, the man recounts almost robotically how he caught his wife with another woman. He talks about brushing his teeth, changing his clothes, and finally, he talks about strangling his wife's cat. Upon hearing this, wide-eyed Tana slowly raises her gun towards the man, but he quickly takes the gun from her. He asks her if she is joking before cocking the weapon and aiming it at his head. The two share some intense seconds of silence, just staring at each other until the man eventually shoots himself dead. In a panic, Tana quickly rushes home. Though the man and Tana have completely incomparable experiences and baggage, they're both hurt and listless people. His wife's cat was innocent, but he still chose to strangle it, presumably to hurt his wife because he couldn't hurt her directly. Or he strangled it to let his pain and anguish be known. Or, even simpler, he strangled a cat because he had all those emotions festering in him with no other outlet. No matter what his reason was, he wasn't all that different from Tana. The next morning, Tana is walking along the stairs when Mrs. Nassani's dog growls at her after sensing her presence. But Tana shrugs it off and ignores the dog to head inside her apartment. There, she removes her disguise and fixes her apartment up before placing the last of the burglar's body parts into a bag for disposal. Tana then leaves through the fire exit before Mrs. Nassani suddenly enters the apartment with her dog. The dog sniffs around, standing by a locked door and making Mrs. Nassini run out to get the keys. However, Mrs. Nassini's dog accidentally bumps into a drawer, causing one of Tana's vases to fall to the ground. Hearing this, Mrs. Nassini quickly returns to Tana's apartment and fixes her dog's mess before leaving. Meanwhile, in the garment factory, Albert rewards the workers by giving them the afternoon off to prepare for their Halloween party that night. Later that day, Tana returns home and asks Mrs. Nassini if she could walk her dog. With Mrs. Nassini's reluctant blessing, Tana heads out to try and get rid of it. She tries getting the dog run over by some cars to no avail. Then, she heads to a nearby port, where she ties the dog by a pole. She proceeds to aim her gun at it. Back in the apartment, she leaves a letter for Mrs. Nassini, telling her that her dog ran away, before preparing for the party. Though it isn't made clear if Tana shot the dog or not, it's apparent that her increasingly flippant attitude towards murder has extended beyond victimizing men of varying innocence. By pointing her gun at the dog, it's as if Tana is starting to use her weapon as the answer to the hurdles and inconveniences she's experiencing. After putting on her nun costume, Tana loads her gun, and she kisses the bullets one by one. She then stands in front of a mirror, pretending to shoot. Night comes, and Tana and Albert arrive at the party together before making their way to their coworkers. Albert mingles around with the people at the party, and he keeps telling them about his partner, Tana. With the crowd dancing to the lively music, Albert and Tana sneak into a nearby room. There, Albert gently kisses parts of Tana's body, down to her leg and foot. When he lifts her skirt, Albert is shocked to find a gun hidden near her thigh. The jig is up, and Tana shoots Albert, alarming the whole party. In an anticlimactic turn of events, Tana's most glaring victim is not her first assailant. It's not even a man who's been going around violating women and enacting violence upon their unwilling bodies. It's just her boss, a painfully plain man whose misgivings are berating his employees and constantly trying to get with Tana. And though Tana's clearly not in any sound state of mind, this can be her own way of fighting against the daily transgressions she's been put through. After all, harm isn't always something grotesque and macabre. The harm most people face is more sinister and nebulous. Some of the men try to check the two, but Tana unflinchingly shoots them as she walks down some stairs. Once she's there, she carefully shoots the men one by one in the crowd. Tana continues her violent burst without remorse, targeting all the men there relentlessly before Lori suddenly reacts. She grabs a nearby knife, and with that, she stabs Tana in the back. As Tana screams in pain, she looks back in shock to find Lori there. Tana could only whisper the word, "Sister," as she falls to her doom. Meanwhile, in Tana's apartment, Mrs. Nassini returns and opens Tana's locked door. When she walks inside the room, Mrs. Nassini carefully sneaks around, searching for whatever Tana is hiding before taking one of the bags there. Suddenly, the door creaks, alarming Mrs. Nassini. She then calls out to the person outside, asking if it's Tana before her neighbor comes inside, clad in a gorilla suit. This surprises Mrs. Nassini, and the two eventually leave Tana's place. When Mrs. Nassini returns to her apartment, she immediately opens Tana's bag and screams in horror as she uncovers the burglar's severed head. In a rush, she frantically makes her call to the police to tell them of Tana's crime. The police then give her a visit, and Mrs. Nassini dramatically talks about how Tana must have killed her beloved dog while her gorilla suit neighbor comforts her. When the police are gone, Mrs. Nassini is left alone in grief. However, as Mrs. Nassini cries, her dog suddenly returns to their home, barking at the door. After being violated by her two assailants, no man has come close to harming Tana again. With her pistol, she was practically untouchable, and it almost felt as if no man can ever take her down. And that's correct, because Tana's undoing was brought by two women and herself. It was a cruel and twisted irony, but with how Tana had fallen off any just and moral standing, it's become a comeuppance against her. Tana was the prey who turned into a hunter, not just against the vile, but against anyone resembling the perceived evil. This only goes to show that the story is not meant to empower, it's not even about retribution. The tale is about Tana's unrelenting vengeance and her perpetuating a cycle of violence. With the .45 pistol that once belonged to the burglar, it's almost as if Tana is killing her victims in the burglar's proxy. It's the wretched effect he had on Tana, seeping through her and damning every man around her. Though unapparent at first glance, this is also a cautionary tale about how one's act of evil can affect even those who they never came into contact with. Subscribe to watch more videos like this. Turn on notifications. And leave a like, it really helps the channel out. Thank you for watching.